My hands, they shook so hard I thought the teacup would shatter right there in front of him, splashing hot Earl Grey all over his smug, yelling face. The sound of his voice, a booming cannon in our supposedly quiet living room, rattled the framed photos on the mantelpiece, each one a silent witness to a life I now realized was built on quicksand. He stood over me, red-faced and raging, his suit jacket already half off as if he'd just stormed in from some high-stakes meeting where he'd lost everything, even though it was me who was losing everything. I could feel the tremor starting deep in my chest, a low rumble of something ancient finally waking up. He slammed his fist on the polished mahogany table, making me jump, the teacup clattering loudly in its saucer. "Give them back, Sarah. Every single thing. Every gift, every penny I spent, and the kids too. They're mine." His words, sharp as shards of glass, cut through the air, hitting me with the force of a physical blow. He gestured wildly around the room, as if it were filled with stolen treasures, not the humble belongings of a lifetime spent together. It was a vicious, breathtaking moment, one of those real-life stories you see unfold for other people, never imagining it would become your own true story of resilience. I swallowed hard, my throat suddenly dry, a lump forming that felt as big as a brick. The indignity of it, the sheer audacity. 50 years. 50 years I'd poured my soul into this man, into this family, into building a home that was supposed to be our sanctuary. And now he stood here spitting fire, trying to erase me from every part of it. He looked at me like I was a stranger, an intruder in my own house, someone who had no claim to the life we'd built brick by painstaking brick. The betrayal was so thick, I could almost taste it, bitter on my tongue. His eyes, once filled with a charm that had completely disarmed me all those years ago, now blazed with a cold, unsettling anger I barely recognized. He was a stranger, really, standing in the remnants of our shattered marriage, demanding a full accounting for every breath I'd taken under his roof. This wasn't just a divorce, it was an eviction notice from my own existence, a brutal end to what I thought was a love story. He had always been so good at playing the victim, at making everyone believe he was the injured party, but this was a new low, even for him. "You hear me, old woman?" he snarled, leaning closer, his voice dropping to a menacing whisper that somehow felt louder than his shouts. "Everything. The car, the jewelry, even those silly little trinkets you hold so dear. And the children, Sarah. The children are mine. They always were." The casual cruelty of his words, cutting me out of the very fabric of our family, was a gut punch. My own heart pounded against my ribs, a trapped bird desperate to escape, but I kept my gaze steady, refusing to drop my eyes. He wouldn't break me, not now, not after all this. My name is Sarah, not just old woman, not just his wife, not just grandma. I am Sarah. And in that moment, as his ugly words hung in the air, thick with the stench of his infidelity stories, I felt something shift inside me. It wasn't the trembling of fear anymore. It was the vibrating hum of a powerful engine roaring to life. My hand stopped shaking. The teacup, miraculously, remained whole. I looked at him, truly looked at him, and for the first time in years I didn't see the man I loved or even the man I had once admired. I saw the architect of my pain, the living embodiment of all those betrayal stories I'd only ever read about. He continued his tirade, oblivious to the change in me, caught in his own self-righteous fury. He paced the room, waving his arms, listing off every item he considered his property, as if I were some thieving maid who had looted his mansion. The house, the investments, the bank accounts. All mine. You contributed nothing, Sarah. Nothing but gray hairs and wrinkles. Each word was a deliberate stab, meant to diminish, to erase. He was a master of emotional torture, honed by years of practice, turning every shared memory into a weapon. My mind, however, was no longer processing his insults. Instead, a peculiar calm settled over me. I watched him, this man who had been my husband for half a century, and saw him for what he truly was. A hollow shell of a human being, filled with greed and resentment. His anger, once so intimidating, now seemed almost comical, a desperate performance. It was then, amidst the chaos of his accusations, that I knew. This wasn't just about reclaiming dignity. It was about exposing the truth, about stripping away the layers of lies that had suffocated me for so long. He paused, out of breath, expecting me to crumble, to weep, to beg for mercy as I had so many times before. He took a deep, satisfied breath, wiping a bead of sweat from his brow. His eyes narrowed, waiting for the familiar collapse, the silent tears that had always been his victory signal. He was used to my quiet despair, my resigned acceptance of his cruel pronouncements, the way I had always shrunk from his rage, absorbing his venom like a sponge. But this time there would be no tears, no surrender. "Well? What do you have to say for yourself?" he demanded, his voice now laced with a condescending sneer, as if he expected me to apologize for existing. He leaned back on his heels, crossing his arms, a picture of smug triumph. He genuinely believed he had won, that his venom had finally broken me completely, reducing me to nothing more than a defeated old woman. He probably already had his next moves planned, envisioning a life free of my burden, free of the quiet presence that had apparently stifled his grand ambitions. I slowly stood up, my joints protesting slightly, but my resolve firm. My voice, when it came, was soft, a quiet whisper against the storm of his anger, but it carried a steel edge he'd never heard before. "What I have to say, Michael," I began, my gaze unwavering, "is that you are right. They are yours." A flicker of surprise crossed his face, a momentary triumph. He thought I was giving in, finally submitting to his demands, broken beyond repair. He actually smirked, a cruel, self-satisfied twist of his lips. "The gifts you gave me," I continued, each word deliberate, a stone dropped into still water. "The car, the jewelry, the house, you can have them back. Every single thing." His smirk widened, and he gestured grandly as if to say, "See? I told you so." He was already mentally tallying his winnings, planning his escape. He saw only capitulation, not the quiet plotting of my own revenge. His arrogance was a thick, impenetrable shield, protecting him from the reality that was about to crash down around him. But then I slowly shook my head, my eyes locking onto his, holding him captive in my gaze. A tiny tremor of unease began to ripple across his face, the first hint that something was profoundly wrong. "But Michael," I said, my voice gaining a subtle power, "there are some things you simply cannot take back. Some things you can't erase with a tantrum or a lawyer's letter." His eyes narrowed, trying to read my expression, a flicker of confusion battling with his overwhelming self-assurance. He tried to speak, but no words came out, caught somewhere between indignation and dawning apprehension. He scoffed, a nervous, almost imperceptible sound. "And what might those be, old woman? Your dignity? You lost that years ago, along with your looks." He laughed, a short, sharp bark that held no humor, just pure contempt. He still believed he had the upper hand, still saw me as the same meek, obedient wife who would always cower before his rage. He had built his entire world on the assumption of my endless subservience, never once considering that the quiet woman he so easily dismissed might harbor a strength he couldn't even fathom. His cheating had become a lifestyle, a secret he thought I'd always accept. My gaze hardened, reflecting a resolve born of years of silent suffering. "My dignity, Michael," I retorted, my voice ringing with a newfound clarity, "was never yours to take. It was always mine. And as for the children," I paused, letting the words hang in the air, knowing they would land with the full weight of their truth. Renee, my daughter, who had been silently watching from the doorway, shifted uncomfortably, avoiding my eyes. She had been so quick to side with her father, to validate his claims, to forget all the years I had sacrificed for her. I took a slow, deliberate step towards him, and he instinctively recoiled, a tiny, almost imperceptible flinch. The man who had once terrified me now seemed almost afraid, sensing a power emanating from me that he couldn't control. "The children, Michael," I continued. "They have seen you. They have seen your true colors, your selfishness, your greed." Renee gasped quietly in the doorway, a small, choked sound. She finally looked at me, her eyes wide with a mix of shock and dawning understanding. "And they, Michael," I said, my voice rising, filling the room, pushing back against the silence, "they cannot be given back, because they are not yours to give or to take." The words hung in the air, a final, definitive declaration. Renee's face paled, the realization of her father's true character, and her own complicity washing over her. This wasn't just my fight. It was a reckoning for everyone who had stood by and watched, or worse, joined in. This was a real-life story unfolding right before their eyes. Michael's jaw tightened, his face contorting in a mixture of disbelief and fury. He opened his mouth to retort, but no sound came out. He looked at Renee, then back at me, his eyes darting around the room as if searching for an escape, a loophole in this sudden, unexpected shift in power. He was utterly disarmed, caught off guard by my defiance, by the strength that had suddenly erupted from the woman he thought he had completely crushed. It was a complete reversal of our decades-long dynamic, and he couldn't process it. "You want every gift back, Michael?" I continued, pressing my advantage, my voice steady and unwavering. "Then fine. You can have them. But you'll also get something else. Something you never imagined." My words were a promise, a threat, a quiet declaration of war. He stared at me, his eyes wide, a chilling realization slowly dawning on his face. The air in the room crackled with an unspoken tension, a silent acknowledgement that the game had irrevocably changed. My own revenge had begun, not with a shout but with a whisper. He tried to speak again, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water, but I cut him off, my voice gaining volume and resonance. "And as for the children, Michael, they will choose. They will choose who they want to be with. And given what they've seen, what they've really seen, I don't think they'll be choosing you." Renee let out a small, quiet sob, and fled from the doorway, disappearing down the hall. My daughter, usually so compliant, had finally faced the truth, however painful it was. Michael looked utterly shattered, his bluster completely deflated. The confidence that had buoyed him through years of deceit had vanished, leaving behind a pathetic, empty man. He stood there, speechless, his eyes fixed on me, a mixture of rage, confusion, and fear swirling within them. He knew instinctively that this wasn't just about the divorce anymore. This was something far deeper, far more dangerous. This was a grandmother takes revenge story, and he was about to become its central character. My own flesh and blood turning on me. If you've ever felt the sting of betrayal from those you thought loved you most, hit that subscribe button, because what happened next nobody saw coming. The shock on Michael's face, that sudden raw fear, was a moment I'd replayed 1,000 times in my head since that confrontation. It wasn't the last time he'd show it either. He was so used to me being the quiet one, the invisible one, the woman who smoothed over all his messes and absorbed every one of his cruelties with a tight smile. But that day something inside me snapped. It wasn't just a divorce anymore. It was a war for my very soul. And to understand that war, you need to know how it all began. How a young, hopeful Sarah slowly became the quiet, underestimated grandmother he thought he could discard. It started with a whirlwind, as so many of these stories do. Michael, he was something else back then. Charismatic, charming, with a smile that could melt glaciers and a voice that promised the world. He swept me off my feet, a young woman from a small town, eager for a grand adventure. He painted pictures of a future filled with laughter, success, and a love that would never fade. I believed him. I wanted to believe him. Every fiber of my being yearned for that kind of happily ever after, the kind you read about in storybooks. He was my prince, or so I thought. Looking back, I see the small cracks, the tiny red flags I smoothed over with the hopeful brush of young love. He always had a way of making everything about him even then, but I mistook it for passion. Our early years were a blur of trying to keep up with his big dreams. Michael always had a new brilliant idea, a new business venture that was just about to make us rich. And I, being the supportive wife, worked tirelessly to make ends meet while he chased those rainbows. I took on extra shifts, scrimped on groceries, patched clothes until they were threadbare, all to keep his dreams alive. I was the silent engine powering our family forward, while he was the flashy car, all gleaming chrome and promises. I remember one Christmas, I wanted to buy a small sentimental gift for my mother, but Michael needed money for a crucial business lunch. He convinced me it was for our future. I gave him the money. My mother got a handmade card. As the children came, first Renee, then David, my world became even smaller, revolving entirely around their needs and Michael's ambitions. I was a mother, a housekeeper, a chef, a laundress, a part-time bookkeeper for Michael's ever-changing businesses, and a full-time emotional punching bag. My own dreams, my love for painting, my desire to finish college, they were slowly, quietly put on a shelf, gathering dust. Michael always had a reason. "We can't afford it, Sarah." Or, "Your place is here, darling, taking care of the family." And I believed him, because that's what good wives did, right? They sacrificed. They supported. They became invisible for the greater good of the family unit. My sister Brenda, she saw it. She always did. "Sarah," she'd say, her brow furrowed with concern, "you're working yourself to death for that man. He takes, and what does he give back?" I'd just smile and brush her off, making excuses for Michael, defending him fiercely. "He's under a lot of pressure, Brenda. He's building something for us." Oh, the naivete of youth, or perhaps the willful blindness of someone desperately clinging to the image of a perfect life. Brenda, bless her heart, never stopped trying. She was my quiet ally, a steadfast beacon of truth in a sea of Michael's charming lies. She listened without judgment, offered comfort without prompting, and always kept an eye out. Then there was Michael's mother, a sweet-talking viper named Evelyn. On the surface, she was sugar and smiles, praising my cooking, complimenting my children. But beneath it all was a subtle poison. "Michael works so hard, doesn't he, dear?" she'd coo, implying I didn't. "He needs a woman who truly understands his brilliance." She subtly undermined me at every turn, suggesting I wasn't smart enough, sophisticated enough, or loving enough for her precious son. She doted on Michael, feeding his massive ego, and silently made me feel like an outsider in my own home, in my own marriage. She was the queen of passive-aggressive manipulation, and I, too naive to see it then, just tried harder to please her. The constant invalidation chipped away at me, piece by painful piece. Michael would laugh dismissively when I offered an opinion on his business, saying, "What do you know about numbers, Sarah? Stay in your lane." He'd belittle my intelligence in front of friends, passing it off as a joke. "Oh, Sarah? She's the heart of the home, not the brains of the operation." And I'd force a smile, my cheeks burning with humiliation, pretending it didn't sting. Every time, a tiny piece of my confidence would wither and die. This was the slow, insidious start of the betrayal stories that would define my life. I remember one particularly stark moment, a chilling warning sign I completely ignored. Michael had just closed a huge deal, one he'd been working on for months. We were supposed to be equal partners in this life, building a future together. He'd promised me a share of the profits for all the quiet work I'd done in the background. But instead of the money, he came home with a brand new gleaming luxury car for himself. He tossed me the keys to our old sputtering sedan and said, "You wouldn't understand the complexities of the market, darling. This was a strategic investment." He had a way of making his greed sound like genius. I swallowed the disappointment, the sense of being cheated, and rationalized it away as his way of doing things. He was the provider after all. That was the first clear moment I truly felt invisible, a ghost in my own marriage, but I refused to acknowledge it. Renee, my eldest, she grew up watching this dynamic. She saw her father as the powerful, charming one, and me as the quiet, ever-present background noise. She absorbed his casual dismissals of me, his subtle put-downs, and started to mimic them. "Oh, Mom, you're so old-fashioned," she'd say, rolling her eyes when I tried to offer advice. She gravitated towards Michael's flash and charisma, his promises of an easy, fun life. She never saw the exhaustion in my eyes, the quiet tears I cried late at night, the immense sacrifices that funded her comfortable upbringing. She saw the outcome, not the effort. She saw her father's grand gestures, never the hidden cost. David, my son, was different. He saw it. He always did, even when he was just a boy. He'd watch Michael with a quiet, knowing gaze, and sometimes he'd find me in the kitchen, offer to help or just sit with me in silence. He felt the tension, sensed the imbalance, even if he didn't fully understand it. As he grew older, he tried to intervene gently at first. He tried to talk to Michael to defend me, but Michael would just laugh him off, calling him too sensitive or a mama's boy. Eventually, David retreated, moving across the country for college and staying there. His absence, though painful, was a silent protest against the life Michael had built, a life that suffocated me. The years rolled by, a tapestry woven with threads of sacrifice, quiet pain, and unacknowledged effort. Michael's businesses occasionally hit big, and we'd have brief periods of lavish living, but he always managed to squander it away on new ventures, on himself, on his vices. I remember one year he bought a second yacht while I was still driving the same old car, and we hadn't taken a proper family vacation in years. He called it maintaining appearances. I called it blatant disregard. But I kept quiet, clinging to the hope that one day, he would change, that he would see me, truly see me, and appreciate everything I had given. I became a master of quiet endurance, an expert at making myself small, at not rocking the boat. I believed that if I was good enough, quiet enough, supportive enough, he would eventually come around. I told myself it was love, commitment, duty. These were the lessons passed down through generations. The love stories we were told, where a woman's worth was tied to her husband's happiness, where self-sacrifice was the highest virtue. I built my entire identity around being Michael's wife, Renee and David's mother, the quiet backbone of the family. I didn't realize I was slowly erasing myself, paving the way for the ultimate betrayal. Then came the mistress. Oh, Michael thought he was so clever, so discreet. But there are no secrets in a small community, especially when one half of a couple works tirelessly to maintain a facade of normalcy, while the other lives a double life. Whispers turned into glances, glances into direct stares. I saw the way people looked at me in church, in the grocery store, pity in their eyes. He said they were just business associates, friends. But the late nights, the unexplained trips, the growing distance between us, it all painted a very different picture. The infidelity stories were no longer just whispers. They were screaming their truth. I confronted him quietly, tears streaming down my face, begging him to stop, to come back to us, to our family. He simply laughed, a cold, empty sound. Don't be ridiculous, Sarah. You're imagining things. You're getting old and paranoid. He made me feel crazy, silly, naive. He gaslit me, turning my perfectly valid suspicions into my own failing. And because I wanted so desperately to believe him, to cling to the remnants of the life I thought I had, I let him convince me again that I was wrong. I pushed the truth down deep inside, burying it beneath layers of denial and false hope. That was the ultimate warning sign. The one that should have screamed at me to run, to save myself. When he looked me in the eye, knowing I knew and lied so effortlessly, so convincingly, that was the true breaking point. Not the screaming match in the living room, not the demands for his gifts, but that quiet, calculated lie, designed to keep me trapped in a web of deceit. I saw his soul, black and twisted, but I still foolishly hoped for a different ending. I hoped for redemption, for change. I hoped for a story where true love conquered all, even betrayal. But this was no fairy tale. That day, watching my own daughter echo his words, dismissing me, validating his cruelty, I knew it wasn't just a marriage falling apart. It was a lifetime of deliberate blindness, of choosing to see what I wanted to see, not what was truly there. And soon, I would learn just how deliberate Michael's plans had been, how meticulously he had set the stage for my complete and utter downfall. The warning signs had been everywhere, tiny whispers in the wind, but I had refused to hear them, until the storm finally broke. The memory of that look on Michael's face, that split second of genuine fear, replayed in my mind like a broken record. It was the moment I realized he wasn't just a selfish husband. He was a calculated strategist, a puppet master, and I had been dancing on his strings for decades. But now the strings were fraying. The quiet fury that had begun to simmer inside me turned into a slow, methodical burn. My focus shifted from merely surviving his cruelty to systematically dismantling his carefully constructed lies. It was no longer just about me. It was about every woman who had ever been made to feel small, worthless, and invisible. The divorce proceedings, what little I understood of them at first, became a horrifying revelation. My initial lawyer, a young man recommended by a well-meaning but naive friend, kept shaking his head, his face a mixture of pity and disbelief. "Mrs. Johnson," he'd say, "there are no records of your contributions to the property. The house, the land, all titled solely in Mr. Johnson's name." My blood ran cold. The house, our home for 50 years, the one I had decorated, nurtured, and filled with memories, was never truly mine. It was a cruel joke, a grand illusion. I remembered signing papers over the years, Michael always rushing me, saying, "Just a formality, darling, for tax purposes." Or, "It's simpler this way, for the kids' inheritance." He'd make me laugh, distract me with a quick kiss, and I'd sign, trusting him implicitly. My hand, steady then, now trembled with retrospective rage. Each signature had been a nail in my own coffin, hammered in by the very hand I held dear. This wasn't just carelessness on my part. It was a deliberate, long-term financial manipulation, disguised as marital trust. Then came the bank accounts. Every joint account we had empty. Every penny I thought we had saved for our golden years gone. Michael's lawyer, a slick-haired shark named Mr. Peterson, calmly explained that Michael had full legal access to all funds, and he had simply moved them. "It's all within his legal rights, Mrs. Johnson," Peterson droned, his voice devoid of emotion, as if discussing the weather. My own meager personal savings, accumulated from little jobs here and there over the years, were just enough to keep me afloat for a few weeks, certainly not enough to fight a legal battle against a man with bottomless pockets. It was a suffocating realization, a cruel property theft orchestrated with chilling precision. The emotional blows were relentless. Friends I'd known for decades, women I had shared recipes and life stories with, suddenly started avoiding me. Their gazes would dart away when I caught their eye. Their voices would drop to whispers as I approached. I overheard snippets of conversations in the grocery store aisle. "Poor Sarah. Always so dramatic." Or, "Michael's such a good man, he must have been pushed too far." The community rumors stung, painting me as the crazy, ungrateful wife, completely erasing my years of quiet devotion and sacrifice. It was a chilling testament to Michael's charm. How easily he could twist the narrative and turn people against me. And then there was Margaret, Michael's sister, my sister-in-law, who had always played the sympathetic confidant. She'd call me, her voice dripping with concern, offering advice. "You know Michael," she'd sigh. "He's so sensitive. You just need to be more understanding." Or, "Perhaps it's best to just let him have the house, Sarah. You wouldn't want to upset him further." She was the queen of veiled suggestions, always painting Michael as the misunderstood victim and me as the problematic one. I had always confided in her, shared my marital woes, believing she was truly on my side. She was my false ally, her words laced with poison. One afternoon, sorting through a box of old photos at Brenda's small apartment, a forgotten relic fell out. A yellowed letter from Michael's own mother, Evelyn, written years ago, long before she passed. Evelyn, the same woman who'd subtly undermined me, but now a voice from the grave. The handwriting was shaky, but the words were clear, even cryptic. "Watch Margaret, dear. She carries a serpent in her heart. She always coveted what was not hers, always schemed for control. She thinks herself clever, but greed leaves a trail." The blood drained from my face. My mother-in-law, in her final moments, had tried to warn me. The hints were there, buried in memory, in things I dismissed as Evelyn's eccentricity. Suddenly, small clues started clicking into place. Margaret's sudden appearance at every financial meeting Michael had. Her casual questions about my spending habits. Her insistent advice that I sign certain papers without reading them thoroughly because Michael knows best. It wasn't just Michael's doing. Margaret was his co-conspirator, perhaps even the architect behind some of the more elaborate legal backstabbing. The realization hit me like a physical blow. The person I had confided in, the one who had offered me a shoulder to cry on, had been actively working against me, pulling strings behind the scenes. This wasn't just a breakup. It was a deeply personal, chilling conspiracy. The dread started to build, a cold knot in my stomach. Every memory, every conversation, every interaction with Michael and Margaret began to take on a sinister new light. The extravagant gifts Michael had given me over the years, the diamond necklace, the fur coat, the expensive trips, had always felt a little off, a little too much like a performance. Now I understood why. They were part of the facade, the shimmering distractions to keep me from looking too closely at the numbers, at the dark family secrets they were hiding. They were given as much to control me as to express affection, a subtle way to bind me to him, to blind me with shine while they stripped me bare of substance. I thought about the family trust, established by Michael's wealthy grandfather, meant to benefit all heirs equally. Michael had always managed it, claiming it was too complicated for me. Now my new lawyer, Ms. Davies, was discovering that the trust had been systematically drained, funneling money into shell corporations Michael and Margaret controlled. My jaw clenched so tight it ached. This wasn't just about my marriage. It was a calculated, long-term theft, an intergenerational betrayal. My heart ached, not just for myself, but for David, for Renee, for the future they had unknowingly been robbed of. The financial collapse wasn't just devastating. It felt like a public shaming. Suddenly, the luxurious life I'd lived, the one Michael had always paraded, felt like a hollow mockery. Friends who had accepted Michael's narrative began to whisper. I heard stories from Brenda about Michael's new lavish lifestyle, how he was already squandering the stolen money, buying expensive cars and gifts for his new younger girlfriend. It wasn't just money he was taking. It was my entire identity, my history, my future. He was erasing me from our shared narrative piece by excruciating piece. One evening, alone in Brenda's tiny spare room, the weight of it all crushed me. I lay on the floor, the rough carpet digging into my cheek, tears streaming silently down my face. The utter helplessness, the profound sense of being utterly alone in a rigged game, was almost too much to bear. My chest ached with the weight of it, a suffocating despair. I thought about giving up, about simply walking away and letting him have it all, letting them win. The idea of disappearing, starting fresh somewhere no one knew my name, felt incredibly tempting. But then I felt a flicker, a spark of defiance. It was a memory of my own grandmother, Mama Rose, a fierce tiny woman who had faced down prejudice and poverty with a strength that belied her stature. She had taught me to stand tall, to never let anyone diminish my worth. "You are a queen, Sarah," she used to say, her eyes twinkling. "Never forget your crown, even if you're the only one who can see it." Mama Rose's words echoed in my mind, a rallying cry from the past, reminding me of the resilience that flowed through my veins. This wasn't just my fight. It was her fight too, the fight of every woman in my lineage who had battled against injustice. I slowly sat up, wiping the tears from my face with the back of my hand. The quiet despair began to recede, replaced by a cold, unwavering resolve. They thought they had trapped me, stripped me bare, left me with nothing. But they had forgotten one thing. They hadn't broken my spirit. They had underestimated the quiet woman, the one who cooked the meals and cleaned the house and absorbed the blows. They had forgotten that sometimes, the quietest ones are the strongest. They had poked the bear, and now, the bear was awake. I looked at the crumpled letter from Evelyn, then at the half-filled journal Brenda had given me. My own words were scrawled on the pages, raw and painful, a testament to my suffering. But next to them I began to write a new chapter. Not a chapter of defeat, but of strategy. I started making lists. Names of people Michael had wronged, odd financial transactions I vaguely remembered, forgotten conversations. I began piecing together the puzzle, not with emotion but with cold, hard logic. The tears were gone. The rage was channeled. My decision was made. I was done staying silent. I was done being the victim. They wanted a fight? I would give them a war. Not a shouting match, not a messy public spectacle, but a meticulous strategic dismantling of their lives, piece by calculated piece. They had played their dirty games in the shadows, believing their lies would never see the light of day. But I was about to turn on every single light in the house, expose every dark corner, and reveal every secret. And Michael, along with his cunning sister Margaret, would finally understand the true meaning of karma. The fury that had ignited within me, cold and precise, was still there. But it wasn't a constant flame. After the initial surge of resolve, the true weight of my situation began to settle, heavy and suffocating, like a damp blanket. Michael's legal team, Mr. Peterson leading the charge, started sending me official notices, each one a fresh blow. The eviction notices for the house, the home I'd lived in for 50 years, felt like a physical threat. They gave me 60 days. 60 days to pack up a lifetime, to find somewhere else to go, to admit that everything I'd built was crumbling into dust. My mind raced, but every door seemed to slam shut in my face. My bank accounts, the few that had escaped Michael's initial purge, were frozen by court order, under some vague claim of marital assets investigation. I had barely enough cash for groceries, certainly not for a new place to live, not with the kind of rent prices in our town. The financial vice tightened, squeezing the air from my lungs. I was trapped, a bird with clipped wings, watching my nest being dismantled. The emotional toll was immense. I couldn't eat. The thought of food made my stomach churn. Sleep became a distant memory, replaced by endless nights of staring at the ceiling, my mind replaying every accusation, every betrayal. My body, already weary from years of quiet labor, began to protest. Headaches hammered behind my eyes, a constant throb, My muscles ached from perpetual tension. I felt brittle like fine china on the verge of shattering. This wasn't just a divorce, it was a siege, and I was losing ground fast. I found myself wandering aimlessly one afternoon, ending up in the local park, the one where I'd pushed Renee and David on the swings, where Michael and I had shared picnics that now felt like a cruel dream. I watched young mothers laughing with their children, grandmothers pushing strollers, and felt a profound, aching loneliness. The shame of my situation, the public humiliation of being discarded, was almost unbearable. Every casual glance from a passerby felt like an accusation. I was the old woman whose husband left her with nothing, the punchline to a cruel joke. I sat on a cold metal bench, the setting sun casting long shadows, and the dam finally broke. Hot, bitter tears streamed down my face, uncontrollable sobs racking my body. I didn't care who saw. Was I so foolish? I whispered to myself, the words barely audible through my choked sobs. So blind? Did I truly deserve this? Every sacrifice, every quiet act of devotion, every moment I put Michael's needs before my own, felt like a monument to my own stupidity. My self-worth, so carefully built up by Brenda's love and Mama Rose's wisdom, was utterly shattered. It was the lowest point I had ever known. I questioned every decision, every turning point. Why hadn't I insisted on my name on the deeds? Why had I trusted him with every penny? Why had I believed his lies, time and time again? The answers were simple and gut-wrenching. Because I loved him, or at least, I loved the man I thought he was. I believed in the sanctity of marriage, in the promise of forever. I believed that love, real love, transcended all obstacles. And now, that belief lay in ruins, trampled under the weight of his deceit. I mourned not just my marriage, but the death of my own hopeful spirit, the girl who believed in fairy tales. A cold wind swept through the park, and I shivered, not just from the chill, but from the raw emptiness inside me. The thought of being homeless, of having no place to call my own, was terrifying. Where would I go? Brenda's apartment, as much as I loved her, was tiny, already overflowing. I was too proud to impose on David, even if he offered. The future stretched before me, a vast, terrifying void. I questioned the very point of going on, of fighting a battle that felt so utterly hopeless. But then, as the last rays of sun faded from the sky, a tiny flicker of defiance sparked. It wasn't a grand revelation, not a sudden burst of strength. It was quieter, more subtle. I remembered Mama Rose during the Great Depression, with nothing but the clothes on her back and 2 small children to feed. She didn't crumble. She planted a victory garden in a tiny patch of dirt, turning scraps into sustenance, building community from despair. She never gave up. Her story, a whispered survival story passed down through generations, echoed in my mind. I reached into my worn handbag and pulled out the leather-bound journal Brenda had given me. My mother's elegant handwriting filled the first few pages, chronicling her own quiet struggles and fierce triumphs. She'd faced down the kind of prejudice and hardship that would break weaker souls. Yet she emerged unbroken. Her words, a quiet act of defiance, seemed to emanate from the very pages. Your truth, Sarah, is your shield. Never let anyone write your story but you. I clutched the journal to my chest, a lifeline in the gathering darkness. I started writing, scrawling furiously, pouring out not just my pain, but my growing determination. I didn't write about Michael, not directly. I wrote about Mama Rose, about my mother, about the strength of the women who came before me. I wrote about the quiet dignity they carried, even in the face of overwhelming odds. And as I wrote, a small stubborn kernel of hope began to take root. This wasn't just about reclaiming what Michael had taken. It was about reclaiming myself. I also thought about Mrs. Gable, my sweet neighbor from down the street, who had stopped by Brenda's apartment earlier that day. She hadn't offered pity, but a warm loaf of her homemade bread and a quiet, knowing look. "You're strong, Sarah," she had simply said, her eyes kind. "Stronger than you know. Don't let anyone tell you different." It was a simple gesture, a piece of neighbor's kindness, but in that moment of utter despair, it felt like a beacon in the storm. It reminded me that there were still good people in the world, people who saw the truth beyond Michael's carefully crafted lies. I reflected on the immense cost of survival, not just financially, but emotionally and physically. Years of biting my tongue, of swallowing insults, of sacrificing my dreams for a man who never appreciated it. It had almost destroyed me. But in that lowest moment, in the cold dusk of the park, I realized that survival wasn't just about existing. It was about choosing life, choosing to fight, choosing to reclaim the parts of myself that had been suppressed for so long. It was about rebuilding, not just a house, but a life from the very foundations up. The despair was still there, a dull ache, but it was now laced with a steely resolve. This wasn't the end, it was a crucible. The fire had almost consumed me, but it hadn't. Instead, it had forged something new, something harder and unbreakable. I would not simply survive, I would thrive. I would show Michael and everyone who had doubted me what true strength looked like. And I would do it with dignity, with grace, and with the quiet power of a woman who finally knew her worth. They say when you hit rock bottom, there's nowhere to go but up. And I was at the very bottom, colder and more alone than I had ever imagined. If you've ever had to rebuild from ashes, if you've ever felt like your spirit was shattered, but still found a way to stand, stick with me. Because this is where the real fight began. Not with a whimper, but with a quiet, burning promise. You won't believe what happened next. The night in the park, clutching Mama Rose's journal, marked a turning point. The tears stopped. The self-pity, though still a shadow, receded. In its place, a cold, methodical clarity began to settle over me. I wasn't just a victim anymore. I was a detective piecing together a puzzle, and the villain wasn't just Michael. My intuition, dulled by years of emotional abuse, began to sharpen, whispering names I hadn't dared to consider before. The true mastermind, I realized with a chilling jolt, wasn't the obvious bully. I started small with the papers I could access. Old tax returns Michael had carelessly left in a dusty box. Property deeds Brenda had insisted on getting copies of years ago, just in case. I spread them out on Brenda's tiny kitchen table. A chaotic mess of numbers and legal jargon. My eyes scanned for inconsistencies, for anything that didn't quite add up. And that's when Margaret's name started popping up more than it should have. Her signature on obscure documents. Her company listed as a partner in ventures I knew were Michael's alone. It was a subtle, insidious pattern, like a poison slowly seeping into the soil. I remembered Margaret's voice, so sweet, so comforting, telling me to trust Michael implicitly. How she'd always been there, seemingly my biggest supporter, wiping my tears, offering sage advice. "Oh, Sarah," she'd coo, "you worry too much about money. Michael handles all that so well." It was a cunning deception, a wolf in sheep's clothing. Margaret, the one I had pitted for her own seemingly difficult life, the one I had poured my heart out to, was not just complicit. She was deeply, intricately involved. My heart clenched with a fresh wave of betrayal, colder and more cutting than Michael's blatant cruelty. This wasn't just cheating revenge from a husband. This was a deep-seated familial stab in the back. Then out of the blue my phone rang. It was David, my son, the one who distanced himself understandably. His voice was hesitant, laced with a regret I hadn't heard before. "Mom," he started. I heard about what Dad's doing. I'm so sorry. I should have been there." My heart ached, a mother's love overriding the years of hurt. But then he said something that sent a jolt through me. "There's someone who reached out to me. A woman named Chloe. She used to work for Dad, left because of some shady stuff. She thinks she has something that might help you." Chloe. The name clicked. Michael had mentioned her once, dismissing her as a troublemaker he had to fire. Now she was my first unexpected ally. David arranged a discreet meeting. Chloe was young, sharp, and fearless. She sat across from me, her eyes burning with a quiet indignation. "Mr. Johnson fired me because I questioned his accounting," she explained, her voice low. "He was funneling money from his legitimate businesses into shell companies, then declaring bankruptcy on the legitimate ones. It was a pattern. And I had a feeling he was up to something even worse with the family funds." She pulled out a small, old-fashioned voice recorder, the kind used for dictation. "Before he fired me," she confessed, "I started recording conversations. Just my own little insurance policy. I got one, Mom, between Michael and Margaret. They're planning the final squeeze on you, laughing about how easy it would be to get rid of your old-fashioned claims to the family home and assets." My breath hitched. This was it. Concrete proof. This wasn't just a suspicion. It was a damning, undeniable fact, a true real-life story of conspiracy. Brenda, ever the silent guardian, had another surprise up her sleeve. She admitted she'd been suspicious of Michael and Margaret's growing closeness for years, ever since Michael's mother, Evelyn, had given her that cryptic letter before she passed. Months ago, Brenda had quietly hired a retired private investigator, a former police detective named Mr. Henderson. He had been working in the background, discreetly gathering information, compiling a thick dossier of Michael's financial dealings, his mistress and Margaret's increasing involvement in his various dubious schemes. He had photos, dates, locations, a meticulous record of Michael's deceit and Margaret's complicity. Suddenly, the pieces weren't just clicking. They were locking into place with a satisfying, ominous thud. The true mastermind wasn't just Michael's ego. It was Margaret's cold, calculating ambition. She had quietly poisoned Michael's mind against me over the years, encouraging his worst impulses, seeing me as a barrier to the family's wealth. She wanted control and she wanted it all. My anger, once raw and emotional, now sharpened into a cold, diamond-hard resolve. This was a true story with a twist, and I was ready to deliver the final shocking turn. I wasn't just planning for revenge born of rage. It was justice born of clarity. I saw the faces of the women in my family, Mama Rose, my mother, Brenda, even David's wife, and knew I was fighting for more than just myself. I was fighting for the very principle of fairness, for the dignity of every silent sacrifice. I met with my new lawyer, Ms. Davies, a formidable woman with eyes that missed nothing. I didn't just sit there and tell her my story. I laid out the evidence, the recordings, the PI's reports, the journal entries. I had done my homework. Ms. Davies, I said, my voice steady, I want every asset Michael took. I want his businesses investigated for fraud. I want Margaret's role in this exposed. And I want the family trust restored for my children and grandchildren. My tone was firm, unwavering. Ms. Davies looked at me, a flicker of surprise in her eyes, quickly replaced by a nod of professional respect. She saw not a broken old woman, but a formidable adversary, someone who had meticulously prepared for battle. She recognized that this was no ordinary divorce. It was a deeply personal, complex web of family revenge stories. My posture changed. My head lifted a little higher. The tremor in my hands was gone, replaced by a quiet strength. I no longer felt like the defeated old woman, the cast-aside wife. I was a survivor, yes, but more than that, I was a force. I spent hours with Ms. Davies, dissecting legal documents, identifying every loophole Michael had exploited, every fraudulent transaction. Chloe and Mr. Henderson joined us, providing expert insights. David, now fully committed, spent his evenings researching property laws and financial regulations, offering invaluable support. The shame that had clung to me like a shroud began to dissipate. I started making phone calls to old friends, not to seek pity, but to share my truth calmly and clearly. I wasn't spreading gossip. I was peeling back the layers of Michael's carefully constructed lies. Some were shocked, others quietly confirmed their own suspicions. They heard my side of the relationship stories, unfiltered by Michael's charm. The whispers in the community started to change slowly but surely, from pity for me to quiet outrage at Michael's actions. The feeling of being no longer the victim was liberating. It was like shedding a heavy, suffocating coat I'd worn for decades. Every step I took, every decision I made was my own. There was a quiet satisfaction in reclaiming my agency, in knowing that Michael's power over me had finally withered and died. He had thought he could simply discard me, that I would fade away into nothingness. He had never imagined the strength that lay dormant beneath the surface, waiting for the precise moment to erupt. This wasn't just a bitter divorce. It was a transformation, a rebirth. I walked into the next court date, not with dread, but with a quiet sense of purpose. Michael and Mr. Peterson were there, looking smug, confident in their carefully laid plans. They exchanged whispered jokes, casting condescending glances my way. They had no idea what was coming, no inkling of the formidable alliance I had forged, the mountain of evidence I had gathered. They still saw the gentle grandmother they had so easily dismissed, unaware that she had become the general of her own quiet army. They thought they'd stripped me bare, left me with nothing but air. But in their greed, they left behind tiny threads. and with the help of those I least expected, I was starting to weave a web of my own. A web Michael and Margaret were about to get caught in. They had no idea what was coming, but I did. I was going to give him back more than just gifts. I was going to give him back the truth. And the reckoning? It was about to begin. The court date arrived, and the air in that room was so thick with tension, you could almost taste it. Michael sat there, looking as arrogant as ever, Margaret by his side, both of them whispering and smirking, completely unaware of the storm I was about to unleash. I sat beside Ms. Davies, my new lawyer, feeling a quiet power hum beneath my skin. This wasn't about shouting. It was about precision, about finally revealing the truth they had worked so hard to bury. The time for whispering was over. Ms. Davies began, her voice calm but unwavering, presenting the first round of legal wins. She started by challenging the property deeds, showing the judge documents from decades ago, proving my name was indeed on the original purchase agreements, expertly concealed by Michael's later refinancing. The look on Michael's face was priceless. A flicker of disbelief, quickly replaced by a furious scowl. He leaned over to Mr. Peterson, muttering angrily, but Mr. Peterson just shook his head, looking stressed. The first crack in their perfect facade had appeared, and it was glorious to witness. Then came the freezing of Michael's assets. Ms. Davies presented evidence of suspicious financial transfers, large sums moved to offshore accounts and shell corporations just weeks before the divorce papers were filed. She cited Chloe's expert testimony, which outlined Michael's long history of financial manipulation. The judge, a stern but fair woman, listened intently. When she signed the order freezing his accounts, Michael literally gasped, his face draining of color. He looked like a child whose favorite toy had just been snatched away. Margaret's hand flew to her mouth, her eyes wide with shock. They thought they were untouchable, and the look of dawning fear on their faces was immensely satisfying. This wasn't just a legal maneuver. It was the start of my business revenge. The news spread like wildfire through our community. Michael had always projected an image of a shrewd, successful businessman. Now the carefully crafted illusion began to crumble. Old friends who had avoided me, who had believed his lies, started calling, cautiously at first, then with genuine apologies. "Sarah, I had no idea," they'd say. "He's such a charmer, always so convincing." The tide of community rumors was turning, but this time in my favor. Michael's carefully cultivated network of contacts, his business associates, started distancing themselves. His reputation, once his most valuable asset, was now his biggest liability. The social and emotional consequences for Michael were swift and brutal. His golf buddies suddenly had no time for him. The exclusive club he frequented quietly rescinded his membership. People started whispering about his affairs openly. His reputation as a family man completely shattered. He went from being the charming, envied pillar of the community to a pariah, ostracized and alone. I heard stories from Brenda about him trying to show up at his usual haunts, only to find himself deliberately ignored, tables turning their backs, conversations dying as he approached. He was experiencing the kind of public humiliation he had inflicted on me for years, only 10 times worse. Renee, my daughter, began calling me almost daily. Her voice was often tearful, filled with regret. She spoke of her father's increasingly erratic behavior, his anger, his desperation. "Mom," she'd confess, "he's not the man I thought he was. He's horrible." She confessed her own shame, her guilt for not seeing it sooner, for siding with him. I listened calmly without judgment. I didn't offer immediate forgiveness, but I offered an ear, a silent acknowledgement of her pain. It was a small but significant step towards healing a deep wound. Her gradual realization of Michael's true character, and her father's unraveling, was a form of poetic justice in itself. The process, however, was not without its grinding challenges. Michael, desperate, lashed out. He filed frivolous countersuits, alleging emotional distress and defamation. He tried to portray me as a conniving, greedy woman, manipulating my lawyer. Mr. Peterson, his lawyer, though clearly stressed, continued to fight dirty, delaying proceedings, burying us in paperwork. There were days I felt exhausted, the sheer weight of the legal battle threatening to overwhelm me again. But I remembered Mama Rose's words. "When the path is hardest, Sarah, That's when you know you're getting somewhere. Miss Davies was a rock. She met every attack with a calm, strategic defense, her sharp mind always several steps ahead. She used Michael's own arrogant words against him, turning his grandstanding into proof of his manipulative nature. Chloe's precise accounting statements, meticulously detailing every fraudulent transaction, became irrefutable evidence. Mr. Henderson's photographic evidence of Michael's secret meetings, his luxurious trips with his mistress, and Margaret's clandestine involvement, painted a damning picture for the judge. Every piece of their carefully woven deceit was unraveling, thread by painful thread. I remained calm, almost eerily so. I walked into every meeting, every hearing with my head held high, my gaze steady. I didn't shout, didn't argue. I simply presented the facts, the evidence, the truth. My voice, once so easily dismissed, now carried an undeniable weight. People in the courtroom, even strangers, began to lean forward, captivated by the unfolding drama, the fascinating moving tales of betrayal and comeback. They saw not a victim, but a woman reclaiming her power, one precise step at a time. One particularly intense hearing focused on the drained family trust. Michael and Margaret sat together, tense, their faces drawn. Ms. Davies presented bank records, tracing the trust funds into accounts solely controlled by Michael, and then a significant portion into accounts co-owned by Margaret. The judge asked Margaret directly, "Can you explain these transactions, Ms. Johnson?" Margaret stammered, her usual composure completely gone. She looked at Michael, desperation in her eyes, but he offered no help. She tried to deny, to deflect, but the evidence was overwhelming. It was in that moment, watching Margaret crumble on the stand, her lies exposed for the world to see, that I truly saw Michael's facade crack. He always relied on her cold, calculating mind to cover his tracks. Now, without her cunning, he was exposed. He looked at me across the courtroom, and for the first time, I saw genuine, unadulterated fear in his eyes. Not just anger, not just frustration, but a deep, primal fear of losing everything he held dear. He knew he was trapped, exposed, and utterly alone. He tried to speak, to protest, but his voice was a choked whisper, utterly defeated. He was no longer the charming, powerful man who had ruled my life. He was a small, pathetic figure, stripped bare of his illusions. His shoulders slumped, his gaze dropped to the floor, unable to meet my eyes. The man who had screamed at me to give back every gift and the kids, was now facing the grim reality that he was about to lose everything, including his carefully constructed image. And the children, the very ones he claimed as his property, were watching, witnessing his downfall. This wasn't just a legal victory, it was an emotional triumph, a profound shift in power. I had taken back control, not with violence, but with quiet strength and undeniable truth. The reckoning had begun, and it was far more devastating than Michael could have ever imagined. The game was truly over for him. The courtroom hummed with a different kind of energy now. No longer the quiet whispers of confusion, but a palpable anticipation. Everyone knew this was the day. The day the truth, all of it, would finally be laid bare. Michael and Margaret sat at their table, a picture of defeat, their faces pale and drawn. Gone was the arrogant swagger, replaced by a hollow-eyed dread. I sat calmly beside Miss Davies, a quiet sense of purpose guiding my every breath. This wasn't just a legal proceeding anymore. It was a public unraveling, a final, definitive climax. The judge, a no-nonsense woman with sharp eyes, called the court to order. Ms. Davies began not with theatrics but with cold, hard facts. She started with the stolen inheritance. She presented certified bank statements proving that a substantial sum, left to me by my own dear mother, money intended to secure my future, had been systematically siphoned off by Michael, disguised as joint investments. The final transfers, she showed, had gone directly into accounts co-owned by Michael and Margaret. The evidence was irrefutable. Michael's face turned a shade of sickly green. Then came Chloe's testimony. She spoke clearly, calmly, detailing the fraudulent accounting practices, the shell corporations, the deliberate bankruptcies of Michael's businesses designed to hide assets and cheat partners. Her voice, though soft, carried the weight of undeniable truth. She played the secret recording, the one where Michael and Margaret, their voices chillingly casual, discussed how to dispose of Sarah's claims to the house and family funds. The judge listened, her expression grim. The public shaming of their actions was complete, broadcast for everyone in the courtroom to hear. The gasps from the public gallery were audible. People shifted in their seats, murmuring in disbelief. Even Mr. Peterson, Michael's lawyer, looked uncomfortable, avoiding his client's gaze. Michael, meanwhile, looked like a trapped animal. He tried to interrupt, to shout, to deny, but the judge silenced him with a sharp bang of her gavel. He was reduced to desperate, inarticulate sounds, his bluster completely gone. Margaret sat rigid, tears streaming down her face, her carefully constructed image of Grace utterly shattered. Ms. Davies then turned to the personal betrayals. She presented Mr. Henderson's detailed reports, complete with photographs, chronicling Michael's extensive infidelity, the lavish trips with his mistress, the expensive gifts bought with money he claimed he didn't have for our family, the mistress's name, pictures of her, details of the property Michael had bought her, all laid out for the court to see. The depth of Michael's deceit was breathtaking, even to me who had lived it. The old secrets of his double life, once hidden behind a charming facade, were now exposed in the harsh light of the courtroom. The revelation hit Renee, my daughter, hard. She had been sitting in the back, her face a mask of hope and fear. As Miss Davies detailed her father's sordid affairs, Renee let out a small sob and buried her face in her hands. David, my son, put an arm around her, his own face a mixture of pain and quiet resolve. He knew Michael was flawed, but even he hadn't grasped the sheer depravity of his father's actions. It was a painful moment for my children, but a necessary one. The truth, however ugly, was finally out. Then came the judge's verdict. Her voice was firm, unequivocal. She began by addressing Michael directly, outlining the overwhelming evidence of fraud, financial manipulation, and deliberate deceit. The poetic justice was delivered not with rage, but with the cold, impartial hand of the law. The family home, now unequivocally mine with clear title and no liens. A substantial sum in financial compensation, far exceeding the original value of the stolen inheritance, to account for years of emotional distress and financial hardship. Michael's remaining business assets were to be liquidated, a significant portion going to me as restitution. He was ordered to pay a lifetime of alimony, a symbolic acknowledgement of his abandonment and the future he had tried to strip from me. But the biggest blow, the one that truly made Michael drop to his knees, came next. The judge ruled that given Michael's demonstrated patterns of deceit and his past attempts to alienate the children from me, I would be granted full control over the remaining family trust, ensuring that David and Renee's inheritance, once stolen by their father and aunt, would be protected and managed by me. Michael had screamed, "Give back every gift and the kids." And now, the kids and their future were placed squarely in my hands, away from his poisonous influence. Michael collapsed in his seat, his head falling forward onto the table, his shoulders shaking. He looked utterly broken, a pathetic shell of the man who had once terrorized me. Margaret was led out of the courtroom by a bailiff, sobbing uncontrollably, her name now synonymous with greed and deceit in the community. The complete emotional reversal was stunning. The once powerful, arrogant man was now a defeated wreck. The weak, underestimated woman now dominated the room, not with anger, but with quiet, dignified power. I rose slowly, my legs steady, my back straight. I looked at Michael, slumped over the table, and felt nothing. No hatred, no triumph, just a profound sense of emptiness, a quiet closure. He had been a chapter in my life, a long and painful one, but a chapter that was now finally definitively closed. My gaze then swept to Renee and David. Renee looked up, her eyes red-rimmed but filled with a new understanding, a raw regret. David simply nodded, a silent acknowledgement of the battle won, the justice served. As I walked out of the courtroom, Brenda by my side, I felt a lightness I hadn't experienced in decades. The weight of Michael's control, of his lies, of the life he had dictated for me, was finally lifted. The air outside felt crisp, clean, full of possibility. I was stronger, profoundly changed, and yes, if necessary, I was perfectly capable of being alone. But I wasn't alone. I had Brenda, David, Chloe, and Mr. Henderson. I had the quiet support of a community that had finally seen the truth. I had fought not just for money or property, but for my dignity, for my voice, for the right to write my own ending. And as the sun hit my face, a soft, warm embrace, I knew, with every fiber of my being, that I was finally free. The shackles were broken, the lies exposed, and the future, once a terrifying void, was now an open horizon, waiting for me to fill it with purpose and peace. The courtroom faded into a memory, a distant echo of a battle fought and won. It's been years now since that day, since Michael crumpled and Margaret wept. The raw edges of my pain have softened, sanded down by the gentle currents of time, and the quiet act of rebuilding. I sit here on my porch swing, the afternoon sun warm on my face, a cup of chamomile tea steaming beside me. The air is filled with the scent of jasmine from the garden I finally planted. A garden I had always dreamed of but never had the time, or the right, to create. This isn't just a house. It's a sanctuary, a testament to what can grow from the ashes. I remember the first few months after the verdict, a strange kind of calm mixed with a lingering phantom ache. It was like waking up after a long illness, weak but alive. I didn't immediately feel joy. Joy felt too big, too bright. What I felt was peace, a quiet, profound sense of simply being. Without the constant weight of Michael's presence, his expectations, his deceit. It was a freedom I hadn't known existed. A freedom to breathe my own air, to think my own thoughts, to finally just be Sarah. Reclaiming my identity wasn't a sudden explosion. It was a slow, deliberate bloom. I started with small things. I painted again, not grand canvases, but small, vibrant pieces that captured the light, the colors of my garden, the quiet moments of joy. I enrolled in a community college class, just for fun, finally finishing that art history course I'd put off for decades. I reconnected with old friends, not the ones who had sided with Michael, but the true ones like Mrs. Gable, who celebrated my victory with quiet pride and endless cups of tea. We talked, truly talked, sharing laughter and stories, no longer needing to hide my pain. My relationship with David deepened profoundly. He became not just my son but my friend, my confidant. He visited often, bringing his own quiet strength, helping me with the garden, sharing meals, simply being there. Renee, on the other hand, had a longer, more difficult journey. Her realization of her father's true nature had shattered her world, too. She struggled with guilt, with anger, with understanding how she could have been so blind, so dismissive of me. She called frequently, always hesitant, always asking for my forgiveness. I listened, always. I never rushed her, never pushed. I simply showed up, patiently, consistently, with quiet love. Over time she started visiting. We started rebuilding, brick by painful brick. A new kind of mother-daughter relationship. One built on honesty and hard-won understanding. And Michael? The once charismatic antagonist, the man who had screamed for his gifts and his kids, found himself truly alone. He lost everything. His businesses crumbled under the weight of legal investigations, and his shattered reputation. His mistress, who had enjoyed the lavish life, quickly abandoned him once the money dried up. He faced legal charges for fraud, though he avoided jail due to technicalities and a plea deal. He lives in a small rented apartment now, a shadow of his former self consumed by regret. I hear he tries to contact Renee, but she rarely answers. He is a testament to the bitter taste of karma stories. His charming mask is gone, revealing the empty, desperate man beneath. Margaret, his co-conspirator, fared no better. Her involvement in the financial schemes, exposed in court, ruined her standing in her own social circles. She lost her job, her reputation in tatters. Her family, once so proud of her, slowly distanced themselves. She lives a quiet, isolated life now, still lost in her own bitterness, still blaming everyone but herself. I sometimes wonder if she ever truly understood the depth of the wrong she did, or if she's simply drowning in the consequences. Chloe, the brave young woman who had the courage to speak truth to power, went on to become a fierce advocate for whistleblowers, exposing corporate corruption and becoming a respected voice in financial ethics. She often calls me, sharing her successes, and I feel a surge of pride. Mr. Henderson, the PI, went back to his quiet retirement, but occasionally sends me a postcard, a reminder of the unlikely alliance that turned the tide. Brenda, my steadfast sister, remains my closest confidant, my anchor. We often laugh now, tears in our eyes, marveling at the crazy, painful journey we endured. The biggest lesson I learned? Survival isn't just living through something terrible. It's not just enduring the storm. It's about more than that. It's about choosing your worth every day, even when the world tries to tell you you have none. It's about realizing that the quiet strength you cultivate in the shadows, the resilience born of pain, is the most powerful weapon you possess. My story is a testament to the idea that you can be gentle and kind, empathetic and understanding, and still be fierce, still fight for what is right. You don't have to become a villain to defeat one. I often think about the gifts Michael demanded back. He wanted the house, the money, the material things. But the greatest gifts, the ones he couldn't see, were the strength I found within myself, the truth that set me free, and the genuine connections I had with the people who truly loved me. Those were the treasures he could never touch, never claim, never take back. They were always mine. And the children? They chose. They chose peace, they chose truth, and they chose me. My life now is rich, not with material wealth, but with genuine connection, quiet purpose, and profound contentment. I share my story often, not for pity, but as an inspiration, a motivational tale for others who might be facing their own battles. I speak to groups, telling my audio stories, my narrated life stories, knowing that in sharing my vulnerability, I can empower someone else to find their own voice. These are not just anecdotes. They are lessons learned through hardship, powerful reminders of the human spirit's capacity for endurance and rebirth. This is my sweet revenge short story, not one filled with dark plots or grand schemes, but one of quiet reclamation, of dignity restored, of a broken spirit made whole again. It's a reminder that even when life feels like an overwhelming current, pushing you under, you always have the power to swim to the surface, to find your own light, and to tell your own true story with a twist. If you're a survivor, if you've had to fight for your peace, if you've ever been underestimated and found your strength, then your story matters too. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Hit that subscribe button now and share your own journey. We're all in this together, building our own powerful endings.